What's the next step for Bijan Robinson to take his game to an elite level? And has Tyler Allgeier played his last down in Atlanta?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the final whistle to the final drive, FanDuel is going to make the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. the Iron that Sharpens the Iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a long time, formerly at FalcFans.com. RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So we are continuing our year-in positional reviews, talking about the running back position. We'll talk about how great Bijan is and how he can become even greater. We'll talk about, Tyler Allgeier and the possibility that we might trade him this offseason. So we'll explore that topic. And since we're talking trading players, let's get part 2 of our 70-part series talking about whether or not the Falcons are going to trade Kyle Pitts this offseason. So we'll do that to wrap up today's episode. I do want to talk about fullbacks, but I was like, you know what? I don't think the listeners are going to care enough about this, but maybe we'll get into that tomorrow when we talk tight ends potentially. So we'll see on that front. But, I talked about this last week on Locked On Sports Atlanta when we were asked to give player grades. I gave Bijan Robinson an A+. No notes in terms of Bijan Robinson. I think he elevated this run game so much this year. He was the best player on the football team. I remember somebody in the Locked On Falcons Discord a couple of weeks ago saying, we need to see Bijan elevate the blocking. And I'm like, my guy, he already is. That, if you basically swapped out Bijan for, say Najee Harris, who's probably the 25th best running back in the NFL, the Falcons run attack would probably go from where it is right now, which is say the 12th best rushing attack in the league, to probably the 25th best rushing attack in the league. And that's primarily because of Bijan Robinson, as well as what Tyler Allgeier are bringing to the table. So I feel like Bijan improved in every element of his game. The biggest area that he needed to improve upon during his rookie season was the ball security. We got no fumbles this year. There was a couple of times where I thought we might get a fumble late in the season, but we got 0 fumbles for that. And we saw Bijan be outstanding in all 3 phases that you're looking for at the running back position: as a runner, as a receiver, and as a blocker. And the blocking point is something, if you've been a regular listener of this podcast over the years, basically since 2018, because I remember talking about this. No, it was really 2017, because I remember talking about this with Brian Hill and Ito Smith in 2017 and 2018. But we've been basically saying the blocking is probably the biggest factor for running back success in the NFL. Or at least it's the most underrated factor. Let's say that. And unfortunately, PFF, the 80-20 rule applies here. And that rule basically being I think 80% of the PFF grades are good and 20% are a little suspect. And at least when it came to Bijan's pass blocking grade this year, where it was a below average grade, I think it was a 51 or 52 or something like that. That's part of that 20% that was I don't know about this one, PFF, because Bijan was incredible as a blocker. He had one bad rep against Vita Vea. And then, Blake Cashman got the better of him in that Vikings game. But outside of that, it was he was outstanding the rest of the season. So I think the one area, though, I do think you can nitpick Bijan and say he could get better at is a little bit more refinement in his route running. But that really, to me, matters only if the Falcons are going to do more in 2025 to feature him as a pass catcher. And I think that's the one area where he can really take his game to the next level. We know he's a outstanding receiver, highlight reel grabs, incredible in the open field, all that stuff, able to separate and all that stuff. But this, I think, is one area where you could see not only growth for him as an individual player, but also in this offense, right? Featuring Bijan Robinson more as a pass catcher. We saw flashes of it, but it wasn't consistent, right? And, that is a core issue I have with Zach Robinson in his first year. I don't think he was doing as much as I would like him to do in order to challenge defensive coordinators where, to me, in the case of both Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts, they were kind of afterthoughts in his passing game. And I think that made it easier for defensive coordinators to game plan against the Falcons. I do think the Falcons did a much better job of this in the final 2 weeks of the season in terms of featuring not Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson. I went back today and looked at the first 4 games and the last 4 games, just looking at all of Bijan's targets in those games and sort of categorized them in 4 categories. So like screen pass, swing pass, check down, or other, right? Screens and check downs, pretty basic that you see in every offense, nothing special there. Swing passes are also basic, but at least in theory, you can argue that they're trying to feature that player because you're trying to get him one-on-one in space against the defender. And then the other are all the sort of plays where you are actually designing routes for Bijan Robinson. And in those first 4 games, Bijan had 16 targets. 14 of them were either screens or swings, or screens or checkdowns, I'm sorry. And only 2 of those were swing passes. So about 12%, 13%. And then in the final 4 games, Bijan had 14 targets. 9 of them were screens or checkdowns, 2 swing passes, and 3 of those design plays. It was a wheel route against Carolina, an angle route versus Washington, and a fade against Washington. And so in terms, you saw 36%. So almost a 3-fold increase in sort of trying to design plays for Bijan. And most of those came in the final 2 games. So that's a positive for Zach Robinson's improvement down the stretch. And hopefully we will pick up where we left off going into 2025 and they can build off of that from there. But the thing of note is the 3 sort of design plays for Bijan in those final 2 weeks, the wheel, the angle, and the fade. None of them were caught. And some of that's on quarterback, some of that's on Bijan. And so again, I think that's where we want to see some improvement for him, just kind of tightening in on the details of running some of those routes and whatnot, and being on the same page with Michael Penix and whatnot. So that will be hopefully something that we'll see improve upon. But, I do want to see more of that sort of creativity involving Bijan Robinson. And this gets back to kind of how you and I fundamentally kind of view the Falcons, right? It's different how we view them. And one of the reasons why I tend to be lower on the Falcons than a lot of people is because I try to view the team from the lens of a defensive game planner, where it's like, are you keeping me up at night trying to deal with all the challenges that you're going to throw at me? And I think for a long time, the ways that the Falcons were successfully able to challenge defenses was with Julio Jones, right? And it was just basically a lot of their offense for a long time was, hey, Julio, go out there and be Julio, be great, right? And, he was such an easy button for a long time that I it sounds crazy to say, but I feel like he's kind of underrated nowadays for how easy it made, calling offense during that decade that he was here. And, you often heard me call him the sun, right? That all the gravity in the solar system revolves around Julio Jones. And you don't have that player anymore. You don't have anywhere close to that. And the closest player to having that sort of Julio Jones level playmaker in your offense is Bijan Robinson. And so, Bijan's not quite the sun. Maybe he's Jupiter, and hopefully, for the astrophysicist, the one that's listening to this podcast on his lunch break, hopefully we can make him more of a brown dwarf. If I understand my astronomical terms a little bit more. So greater than the Jupiter, but not quite the sun, somewhere in between brown dwarf. So that's what we're hoping for in terms of getting Bijan more involved in the passing game. So we'll see if we can do that. If we can use that, we'll force defenses to have to defend every blade of grass. And the offense becomes a pick your poison type of offense where it's like, oh, well, you want to defend against that guy? Well, guess what? That leaves you sort of screwed against this guy. I remember, we saw glimpses of that this year. I can't remember which game it was. I want to say it was the first Bucks game, but I remember in a postcast on Locked On Sports Atlanta, we were talking about the offense is starting to look like a pick your poison offense because they were able to spread the ball around to 7 different pass catchers or something like that. I want to say that was the first Bucks game, but I can't recall specifically. And so I want more games like that for this Falcons team moving forward. And I think Bijan being more of a pass catching threat that defenses are forced to have to game plan for is part of that. You got to have eyes on him, right? And then when you have your eyes on him, that creates opportunities for other players, right? And a great example of that was the Drake London touchdown that we saw against Kansas City on a fake screen where Bijan was lined up wide. They faked a screen to him. Both defenders, the guy covering Bijan and the guy covering Drake London, went for the screen, and Drake London walked waltzed into an end zone untouched for a touchdown. So more plays like that, right? And again, I think that's part of this whole process of we can get more of those if we force defensive coordinators to stay up late at night trying to figure out how they deal with Bijan and put a lot of resources and energy into trying to deal with him, only for the Falcons to zig when they expect them to zag, right? Misdirection. What a crazy concept, right? So, I don't necessarily need to see that like 5 times a game, but I do think it needs to be semi-regular for this offense to really take that next step. So we'll see what happens for Bijan Robinson, and hopefully a very bright future ahead of him as one of the very best running backs in the NFL. A player that may not have as bright a future in Atlanta is Tyler Allgeier, because he is entering a contract year, and there's needs to be a conversation this offseason about whether or not the Falcons would benefit from trading Tyler Allgeier. And we'll get into that, as well as what I thought of Tyler Allgeier having, I think, his best season in 2024 as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So from the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel is going to make the NFL playoffs even more exciting, because right now new customers can bet $5 and you'll get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. FanDuel app is easy to navigate. There's a variety of ways to keep the games more exciting. You can bet straight up. You can bet money lines, spreads, props, who's going to be the first guy to score. All that stuff and more is available for you at FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And again, you'll get started with $300 in bonus bets over at FanDuel.com. And of course, when you head on over to FanDuel.com, go check out the lines for this weekend's conference championship games. Philadelphia 6.5-point favorites over Washington. Kansas City 1.5-point favorites over Buffalo. My picks this playoff have been, nearly immaculate, but there are 2 big blemishes on it, and it's been picking against Washington. So I got to make the choice over the next, couple of days of whether or not I'm going to rectify that situation and actually pick Washington for once, or continue to pick against them and hope that they crash and burn. So whether you're pro, anti, Washington, Jaden Daniels, Dan Quinn, whatever you want, head on over to FanDuel.com and make this playoff season unforgettable. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So before we get into the, do we trade Kyle Pitts? No, Tyler Allgeier. We'll get to the trade Kyle Pitts later in the episode. But I do want to say, first off, Tyler Allgeier, I thought, played excellently this year. Right. And so this conversation about trading Tyler Allgeier has nothing to do with Tyler Allgeier. It has everything to do with the Falcons, right? The choices and trades that they've made over the past year or so that has limited their assets, limited their ability to improve their roster. And so now you're looking at basically trading an asset like Tyler Allgeier, a very valuable asset to this football team, in order to sort of rectify that situation. So again, I think Tyler Allgeier was excellent. I'd argue that this was his best season as an Atlanta Falcon, right? I thought in 2022 he was more productive than he was this past year, but I thought a lot of his success was just basically because the offensive line was opening up these wide open run lanes and whatnot, and he was taking advantage of that. And I think you could have put anybody in the Falcons offense that year, and they probably would have been a 1,000-yard rusher. I feel like the blocking has taken a major step back. We'll probably talk about that later in the week. But I thought Tyler Allgeier in 2023 was still solid, despite the blocking not being quite there, but just wasn't spectacular. And I felt like this year he was spectacular, even if his production suggests that he was just solid, right? My favorite run for Tyler Allgeier is probably that one he had against the Raiders. It was a kind of a Thunderdome run. 3 men enter, 1 man leaves, and it was Tyler Allgeier, right? It was a toss play where 2 Raiders defenders were able to penetrate that play, hit him 4 yards deep into the backfield. He trucked both of those guys at the same time and then turned it into a 1-yard gain. So got 5 additional yards. It was one of the more impressive 1-yard gains I've seen, at least in Atlanta. It's not quite as impressive as like a Marion Barber 1-yard run, but it's up there, right? And so that was one of my favorite plays from Tyler Allgeier. And so to me, getting into the conversation about trading Kyle, I'm going to keep doing that, guys. I'm sorry. I'm so used to saying the sentence and the phrase trading Kyle Pitts that I'm going to say trading Tyler Allgeier. It just doesn't sound right coming out of my mouth. But the case for that is this is a contract year. 2025 is the final year of his rookie contract. It seems at this point in time, it's very unlikely that the Falcons are going to re-sign him after the 2025 season, right? Because presumably he can go out there and get a lucrative contract to be a bigger part of another team's offense than he is currently in Atlanta. Like I'm envisioning a David Montgomery, James Conner type of role for him in the future. And both of those guys got over $9 million a year on their contracts, their current contracts with the Lions and Cardinals. And like at this point in time, like it would be hard for the Falcons to justify paying Tyler Allgeier more than half of that number, right? Like $4 million, okay. Like I think Tyler Allgeier is worth that, but like if you're paying him more than that, like you need to have a much bigger role in this offense than what he currently has. And so ultimately, that's why, like, I think he's almost certainly going to walk if and when he hits the open market. So we'll see on that front. But if you basically the argument is if you can get something for him now, right? And potentially a draft pick that could wind up helping your team beyond this season, for multiple years, 3 to 4 years or more, right? Combined with the limited draft picks that the Falcons have, they have 5 picks currently: a first round pick, a second round pick, a fourth round pick, and 2 sevenths. Right? There's a case to be made that Tyler Allgeier trading him can help you improve your team in the long term, even if you're losing something in the short term. So long story short, I think if the Falcons could get a 3rd or 4th round pick in exchange for Tyler Allgeier, I would probably take that if I was in Terry Fontenot's shoes. As much as I love Allgeier, I don't think you can afford to turn down that type of value in the return. And, it's basically with a 3rd or 4th round pick, at least, whether Terry will deliver on this expectation, but at least you can think and hope that you're going to get a starter out of that. And at this stage, Tyler Allgeier is basically a backup, a very good backup, the best backup you have on your entire roster. And it's not really even close. I'm trying to think, like, who else could I put in that? Nope. It's not even close. Like maybe Zach Harrison. Maybe Zach Harrison's your second best backup. And he's going to be probably a starter next year. So we'll see. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, getting distracted. Shout out to Charlie Warner. He's got the bronze medal. But like, you're trading a backup running back for a starter potentially, theoretically. Plausibly, right? So I would sit here today though and be skeptical of whether or not a team is going to offer a 3rd or 4th round pick for Tyler Allgeier. The last time a running back was traded, that wasn't named Christian McCaffrey for anything higher than a 5th round pick was Duke Johnson back in 2019. Since then, we've seen a lot of running backs get traded, but almost always for 5th, 6th, and 7th. So the precedent is kind of saying that that's probably what you're going to get. Like I remember Jordan Howard got traded to the Eagles for a 6th round pick. And I think Howard and Allgeier are pretty comparable in terms of skill set. In fact, Howard was my ceiling comp for Tyler Allgeier when we drafted him. Khalil Herbert just got traded this past offseason going into his contract year for a 7th round pick. And his 2023 production in Chicago before he got traded was basically the same as Tyler Allgeier's 2024 production. So I would assume that if you did offer Tyler Allgeier, you should be able to get a 5th round pick. I think you can get more than the 6th or 7th. I hope you can get more than the 6th or 7th, but you should be a 5th round pick, but I would be skeptical of whether you get more than a 5th round pick. So that's kind of what gives me pause, because that 5th round is kind of the stage where it's like, I don't think that's really that valuable an asset via the draft, right? That I think Tyler Allgeier is going to give you more value on the football field than a 5th round pick, who's almost certainly only going to be a special teams player. Like basically looking it up, like the average amount of snaps that at least a 2024 5th round pick played was about 160 some odd. That's about what JD Bertrand played. So JD Bertrand, 5th round pick, is a pretty typical return, at least in year 1, of what you're going to get out of a 5th round pick. And so if you're asking me, would I trade Tyler Allgeier for JD Bertrand or another rookie that's going to give me JD Bertrand type production? I'm like, no, I don't want to do that, because I think Tyler Allgeier is going to give you a lot more, right? Essentially, like trading Tyler Allgeier is going to make your offense roughly 10% worse. And that number is not a number I pulled out of my butt, but it's based off of roughly the average number of successful plays per game that Tyler Allgeier provides for your offense. And when we talk about this Falcon team heading into 2025, we've talked about how, a lot of your success in this upcoming season, in this kind of make or break season, depends on you maximizing your offense, which again is why I spend so much energy hating on Zach Robinson. He can't keep getting away with this, right? No, but and so that 10% difference is not significant on its own, but is significant for a team that basically has zero margin for error, is basically what I'm getting at. And so, I think a 3rd or 4th round pick would make that worthwhile, that 10% loss. And, if you do trade Tyler Allgeier, that 10% loss, even if you don't get the 3rd or 4th round pick, maybe you can make the case, okay, whatever we get from that 5th round pick, coupled with an improvement, a year or 2 jump for Jace McClellan, who I thought gave you positive reps in garbage time as an interior rusher this past year. especially when those were one of the handful of times that you were running duo consistently with him. And so again, speaks to the diversification of the run game. More on that later in the week when we talk O-line. But if you can get a jump from Chase McClellan, you can probably sign a cheap veteran that's not going to give you Tyler Allgeier type of production, but maybe can give you 50% of what Tyler Allgeier, and that coupled with Chase McClellan's improvement and coupled with whatever improvement you make elsewhere on your roster, maybe that mitigates that 10% loss and you can justify, trading him for a 5th round pick. So, we'll see on that front. Now, the other factor that I can't really calculate at this point in time is allegedly this is a deep running back draft class. And so there are plenty of teams that may just decide, wait, we'd rather use a 3rd, 4th, or 5th round pick on a 22-year-old running back that we can get is cost control for 4 years rather than Tyler Allgeier, who's going to be 25 in April, and he's only cost control for 1 year, and then we have to pay him if he plays well. So that is also a factor that will play a part in what Tyler Allgeier's trade market is going to be. But I do sit here, at least right now, in late January, thinking there are a handful of teams that I think right now, if they knew Tyler Allgeier was available via trade, that they would absolutely be running to the phone. Dallas, Pittsburgh, Miami, and Las Vegas are the 4 teams that immediately come to mind in that regard. And all of those teams, with the exception of Pittsburgh, have multiple mid-round assets in those 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds that they could potentially part ways with as part of a Tyler Allgeier trade. So, the Tyler Allgeier trade talk won't probably get nearly as much attention as the Kyle Pitts trade talk, but it is at least worth considering and certainly will be a topic of further discussion later this offseason. But let's get to the topic of further discussion today, which is, again, revisiting the Kyle Pitts trade discussion and why I still feel like there's a lot of meat left on the bone for what Kyle Pitts can do in Atlanta. But if the Falcons, aren't interested in picking that bone clean, then they might as well trade him. So let's break that down as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Therapy is a game changer. It can help you manage your stress, improve your sleep, and help you communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into your busy schedule can be a challenge. And that's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace is the leading virtual therapy provider to getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. It's easy because signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist usually within 48 hours. It's accessible because you can schedule your sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. And it's affordable because Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and most it's only a $0 copay. And as a staunch advocate of therapy, I've been, in therapy off and on for the last couple of years. It's helped me teach me positive coping skills, like you can only control what you can control. And it also helps me with accountability. Sometimes it's good to have an unbiased person call you out on your BS that you would normally get away with in your everyday life. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give Talkspace a try. You'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code SPACE80. So this is part 2 of a 70-part Kyle Pitts trade talk discussion. Part 1 was myself and Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta talking about it on last Friday's episode. Go check that out. Now I will, admit up front, I'm a staunch Kyle Pitts apologist, right? I think a lot of the criticism he gets is based off of where he was drafted. And I think expectations were high that he was going to be the next Travis Kelce and Julio Jones type of player. He hasn't lived up to that. And I think that leads to a lot of people criticizing him more than they should. But my stance on trading Pitts is basically, if the Falcons don't plan on making him a featured part of the offense, they should trade him. I disagree with Jarvis on Kyle Pitts, not being featured in this offense because he doesn't want to be. He lacks that desire to be great, as Jarvis put it on Friday's episode. I'm not usually a big fan of questioning a player's desire, right? Especially a player that played through injury the previous year. I'm not concerned about his commitment. But if we are making the case that Kyle Pitts has quiet quit on the Atlanta Falcons over the last year, I think he's more than justified for that, given how limited his role was this year. And I think 90% of the people listening to the show should be able to relate to that. But, for some reason, we got a whole bunch of Lumbergs in this fan base. And if you don't know what that reference is to, go check out the most popular movie from 1999, other than Matrix. I don't know if that's actually true, but it feels like it was. But anyway, and so that limited role was basically, he's going to block, he's going to chip and then be a check down option, or he's usually running clear out routes. And this may not be accurate, but it felt like that was 70% of what Kyle Pitts was doing. Those things. And so if you put yourself in Kyle Pitts' shoes, and given what he's being asked to do, it's like, yeah, you would quite quit on the Falcons and you just basically be like, yeah, I'm going to show up and do my job, but I'm waiting for my contract to be up, and so I can hit free agency and hopefully go to a place that will, better utilize my skill set. And you sit there and you say, well, him and Kirk weren't on the same page. And it's like, how could he be? Because you weren't really asking him to run routes that build rapport, right? And timing in the offense. You just, you can't build that when you're just basically, being a check down option or running clear out routes, in my humble opinion. But, I'm sure there are plenty of people that disagree with that. So, I think a lot of the focus on Kyle Pitts is about what he isn't as opposed to what he is. And what he is a 6'6", 240-pound tight end with 4.4 speed that, to me, if you can't figure out how to get that guy in advantageous situations, the problem is you as a play caller, not necessarily the guy, but, running the plays. And so one quick example I would use of that is if you think back to what Kyle Pitts' first catch was, not in the regular season, but in the preseason. He had one catch in the 2021 preseason, in the preseason finale against the Browns. It was the opening possession of that game. They ran a split zone play action concept where Kyle Pitts was that backside blocker that released into the flat. Felipe Franks rolled out, took about 28 seconds to get him the ball, but eventually when he did get him the ball, Kyle Pitts turned that into a 27-yard gain. If you've been listening to the podcast for the last 6 weeks, you've heard me talk quite a bit about why it took the Falcons so long to start incorporating the split zone play action into their offense. And they didn't do it until week 16 against the New York Giants. And it should have been something from the jump in the offense. And again, that's just one way of using Kyle Pitts. That template is there. There's so many other ways, right? And I know you guys are tired of me blaming everything on Zach Robinson. And it's not to say that Kyle Pitts doesn't bear any responsibility for his shortcomings, right? He's not always locked in. That second Bucs game is a great example of that fumble or not fumble, right? Wink, wink on that touchdown is a prime example of him not always being locked in. And I joke with Tanisha Batiste on Locked On Sports Atlanta, that you're good for one boneheaded play from Kyle Pitts every single week. And so we need him to eliminate those bonehead plays and clean that up. But I watch some film, I watch film occasionally, and I just see all these other tight ends and how they're utilizing it, whether it's K. Dotton, Tucker Kraft, TJ Hawkinson, Isaiah Likely, seeing these guys being more impactful, more productive. And I'm looking at how they're utilized, and I'm like, why can't we do that? Is it because Kyle Pitts doesn't want to be great? I think he wants to, okay, again, I'm not going to go in that rabbit hole, but again, I think a big part of this is just how bad the Falcons play action passing attack is. And that was getting to the point I made with Jarvis on Friday's episode, where it's just if you had a good play, I don't need to worry about Kyle Pitts' desire to be able to scheme up ways to feature him, in a functional play action passing attack is basically what I'm at. So basically what I'm saying is, if this regime is not committed to making Kyle Pitts a featured part of their offense and him having a career year in 2025, right? And I certainly don't think they're in the wrong for, not necessarily being committed for that. It doesn't make them bad people. It just means that I think you're wasting his talent. So, to me, if you want more buy-in from Kyle Pitts, if that's the issue in your eyes for Kyle Pitts, you need to sell him on it. That is basically what I'm getting at, where it's we're going to, we promise you, Kyle, that you're going to have a monster year. And if they're not willing to make that promise, then trade him, right? And I think there's probably nearly half the teams in the NFL that would look at Kyle Pitts as an upgrade over what they currently have at the tight end position. So I do think that trade market should be robust. It goes back to the conversation I had with Jarvis on Friday, talking about the Lambo versus the minivan. Go listen to get the full context. But a lot of teams are going to look covetously at that Lambo. In this case, that analogy, that metaphor being Kyle Pitts is the Lambo. And so I think you should be able to get a third or fourth round pick for Kyle Pitts. I think it's much more likely that will be a trade offer for Kyle Pitts. And I think if that's the case, then go ahead and do it. It's the same math that you're doing with Tyler Allgeier, because again, I don't even know if Kyle Pitts was 10% of your offense, right? Just based off of how he was being used. I'm sitting here saying he has the potential to be more than that, but unfortunately they're not interested in that. So right now I would sit here and say probably a 60-65% chance that he gets traded at this point in time. We'll see if that number goes up or down over the coming weeks. But as I said, if this coaching staff is not interested in committing to Kyle Pitts, and again, people will come up with a multitude of reasons why they are absolutely justified in doing so. That's fine. But as I said, if they're not committed to that, then trade them, right? If you're, you want to drive around a minivan, be my guest, drive around a minivan. But basically the argument I tried to make on Friday, and I will reiterate today, is if your goal is to win a race, and in this case, the race is being able to generate explosive plays and outscore, you want to go fast, right? And outscore your opponent by generating explosive plays and getting more points, while you're driving around that minivan, there's gonna be a time where you're behind in the race and you'll be like, man, I wish I had a Lambo. So we'll see. So that is it for today's running back review, with more talk of Kyle Pitts. We'll probably talk a little bit more about the other tight ends on the roster, like Charlie Warner, and maybe we'll dabble into the fullback conversation because Charlie Warner's part of that. But the bulk of tomorrow's episode will probably be devoted to the wide receiver position, and that will give us, 30 seconds of praising Zach Robinson on this podcast, right? 30 seconds too many, if you ask me. But one of the few positives you can say about Zach Robinson's offense this past year was him maximizing these wide receiver positions, and that will piggyback on today's conversation because it's like one of the reasons why you would like the Falcons to trade some of these guys. They accumulate more assets, and to make up for the difference in losing some of these assets, you add potentially another wide receiver that we know Zach Robinson can maximize, and that will make up for whatever lost, revenue, or so to speak, lost value that you lose in Tyler Allgeier or Kyle Pitts, because if we can get a premium number 3 wide receiver into this offense, that could more than make up for whatever you lose by moving on from some of these players. So that will be a worthwhile conversation on tomorrow's episode. We'll see if the Falcons make any other moves in the meantime that merit discussion. Eventually they're going to hire a D-line coach, so that is imminent. Hopefully that will come on the day that we talk, at the end of the week when we talk O-line. So it's just, we're trying to get synergy right now on content at this point in time in the offseason. So guys, continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen by checking this out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, and make sure you check out Locked On NFL, 2 shows daily, get you the lowdown on all the other things going on around the league, as well as this upcoming weekend in the playoff action. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.